to really vet this out. And they said, well, can I guarantee that I would be able to convict individuals? And I said, of course not. You can't guarantee anything like that in the criminal investigative arena. And so with that, they said, well, then we're done. And I was in shock. It's unheard of for a special agent in charge to be denied the opportunity to complete an investigation that was so far from nearing its end.
So you have the EPA considering penalties of upwards of, what, $800 or $672 million, possibly felony charges against BP executives, and they end up settling for $20 million?
Yes, they ended up settling for $20 million, and I was told there was a couple of reasons for that $20 million figure. One, we have to go back to the Olympic pipeline case. The Olympic pipeline ruptured in Bellingham, Washington in 1999, and the resulting spill of gasoline into a stream caught fire. 3 individuals were burned to death, and a stream was destroyed. That case was investigated by EPA out of the Seattle office. In 99 and 2000, it was considered a very significant criminal case in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Seattle, which was at that time under the Clinton administration. When the Bush administration took over at the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney came in, it became a bottom-of-the-barrel case and was ultimately settled out for a very low amount of money. And I have been talking with one of the investigators on that case, and he said the amount of money that was determined as the fine in that matched what the insurance companies were willing to pay. So Olympic Pipeline essentially did not have to actually pay the fine, but it was covered by their insurance company. Now that Olympic Pipeline settlement became the benchmark within the Bush Department of Justice for environmental crime. So then we had the Texas City explosion by BP that resulted in a number of deaths and injuries caused by failure to maintain the same sort of corporate practices that I saw in Alaska. And that case got wrapped up at the same time that mine did, and the settlement there, based upon the Olympic Pipeline precedent, was set at $50 million. So they said, well, then my spill case in Alaska could not get anywhere near that amount because that had fatalities, and so they settled it for $20 million. Now, for BP, $20 million is a rounding error when you look at the amount of profits they make on a daily basis. It made no impact into changing their practices. The only thing that could really change the practices had been if we'd been able to pursue and hold individuals accountable for their decisions. As you well know, the corporations do not make decisions, the individuals within them do. And so to hold those individuals accountable would have been the proper conclusion to the investigation. Now we're seeing the same sort of thing in the Gulf, in this catastrophe. And information is coming to light that corners were cut and that employees' concerns were being ignored. It's the exact same pattern that we saw with BP in Alaska and with BP in Texas City. And
we're going to break, Scott West.
I understand a couple of...
And then come back to this discussion. Scott West, former special agent in charge of the Criminal Investigation Division of Environmental Protection Agency, speaking to us from Seattle. And we're going to also talk about how rare it is to pierce the corporate veil and go from fines on a multi-billion-dollar corporation to actually charging corporate executives. This is Democracy Now! Stay with us. pass it on down by Alabama. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest, Scott West, former special agent in charge of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Environmental Protection Agency. He went after BP for criminal prosecution in the Alaska oil spill several years ago, was looking for criminal prosecution of the executives, but the Bush Justice Department ended up shutting down the investigation. As he was doing his investigation, the Texas City refinery, BP's refinery, blew up, and 15 workers were killed. Now, of course, recently in the latest oil explosion in the Gulf of Mexico, 11 workers were killed. Juan?
Well, Scott West, you said you were shocked when the decision was made not to pursue criminal charges. What was your reaction subsequent to that, and was any retaliation or mistreatment occur toward you afterwards?
Well, my reaction was just shock. I'd never seen that happen. It's one thing to have thoroughly investigated a case, and you can have the lead investigator who's invested a lot of his or her personal energy and time into a case, and having concluded, looking under every rock and turning every stone, be frustrated with the fact that the evidence just isn't there, even though that investigator is convinced that something should be done. But in those cases, you recognize, okay, we shut it down and we move on. But in this particular instance, we had all of these documents that had not even been looked at, and a whole list of individual witnesses that still needed to be interviewed. And then you had the special agent in charge. At that time, I was the SAC in Seattle. And you had the special agent in charge going to the Department of Justice and asking for an extension of time. When they first said, no, we're going to settle this, I kept asking, why the rush to settlement? I need at least a couple more years. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And I said, well, give me a year. And they said, no. And I said, 6 months? No. 3 months? No, it's over. And I was incredulous, and I was making a lot of noise about that. And a very frustrating part was that my own management in Washington, D.C. failed to back me up. They fell right into lockstep with the Department of Justice decision and accused me of being a zealot and all sorts of things, and said that 17 months was a perfectly adequate time to investigate a case like this, when they all know from their own experience that that's a ridiculous statement.
Scott West,
so,
do you think if BP
I was quite upset.
Do you think if BP executives were brought up on charges that we would see what we are seeing in the Gulf of Mexico today?
Well, I doubt we would be having this discussion and we'd be a catastrophe like this in the Gulf. What the government has done over the past several years is taught BP that it can do whatever it wants and will not be held accountable. So decisions have been made, very poor decisions have been made to increase profits and put workers at risk, and been allowed and endorsed by the federal government.